Today we're at Pallant House Gallery in the Archive and Library, and we are here with Jane Holt, who is our lovely librarian, who will be showing us a few pieces today from the library and from the archives, and also some pieces that cross over between the two. Jane, what have you got for us?
Okay, well, welcome to Patronage House Library and Archives. The library's got about 19,000 actual volumes of books, and what I find interesting is what's the sort of movement between what is a book to what becomes an archive piece, because we've got some extensive archives, to what becomes an artwork. And I think we'll sort of use Hans Feibusch today as a nice illustration. But I want to start with the idea of books. So a book, as we said, it's, you know, they contain knowledge, they contain information, they give pleasure, but they're not unique in themselves, except when somebody puts a mark on them. So as soon as we get a mark on a book, it becomes an archive object. It becomes something that tells another story, and it becomes a unique object.
Just to explain, what is this book then?
This book is by R.H. Walensky. It's called English Painting, and it belonged to Charles Keeley, who's one of our key collectors. It's one of his collections that we have within Patronage House Gallery.
I mean, Walensky was a huge name as an art critic, wasn't he?
And he was a mentor to Charles Keeley when Charles Keeley started to collect modern European and British art.
So, so he helped sort of form the collection a little bit as well.
Yeah, and which is why it's so nice to see Keeley's own notes at the back of this.
So what sort of notes have we got on here then? I see a few dates floating about.
Mostly artist names and ticks and dates.
Oh yeah, Augustus John, Wyndham Lewis.
Paul Clay.
Major names in our collection here.
Yeah, absolutely. Edward Burrough. So that's one of Keeley's books. And then another one, which is his book, John Goulding's book on Cubism. Again, we've got Keeley's book plate in the front, which is actually really nice. And again, lists of artist names, ticks, crosses, all sorts of annotations, which I think is really interesting.
Really interesting. It's always like sort of coding down the side, isn't it?
Yeah.
Sort of crosses and...
and he's even sort of done it on some titles in the Faber Gallery books. So he's obviously sort of thought, well, those would be good to have too.
Yeah. A real working collection to see what he's collecting at the time.
Another collection that we have is the Georgian Danette collection, which makes a significant part of our library. We've got a significant number of their own art library books within Patronage House Gallery Library. And this is a catalogue from Waddington's from the 1960s of Terry Frost. Terry Frost was actually a friend of Danette's, and this is quite nice because...
I mean, George Danette was an artist himself,
yeah, but he collected a lot of the people that he knew and worked with. So he was down in St Ives, he knew Frost, he knew a lot of the other St Ives artists, and Frost was a personal friend. And what's nice about this one is that, again, we've got annotations by Danette. Danette was a great annotator. He wrote in all of his books. As a librarian, you get a bit kind of like, oh, please don't write in the books. But as an archivist, it's like, this is so important. And he's put figures by the side of the paintings. Obviously, this was a selling exhibition. More than likely prices. We know that these are prices because they've got pound signs in front of them. And one of them is underlined in red. The rest of the annotations are in pencil. And this work, Blue, Black and White, 1960 to 1961, is a work from George Danette that's in our collection. Now, obviously, we can't assume that that's when he bought it and that's what he paid for it. But it's very nice to see some evidence.
Yeah, as a curator, that's a pretty good indication. It's something definitely
helps the provenance.
And also a work that's on view at the moment as well, which is nice.
And then just moving on to sort of where I think archive pieces then merge into art, is what we're going to talk a little bit more about here, is again a Terry Frost book.
Huge book as well. Taking up
very important Terry Frost book. Again, we've got a lovely book plate, George Danette's own book plate here. But this is actually illustrated on the front cover, on the frontispiece by Terry Frost, with a dedication to Georgian Danette. And marginally an artwork, but certainly by the artist. So I would say that's an artwork.
It's really fun, isn't it? The sun, the sea, a little boat.
Yes.
Yeah, very nice. And from 1995. a late Christmas present, possibly.
Yeah, possibly.
20th of January.
Possibly. But it's very nice. And I like that he's got the code for a fishing boat for Penzance, and then GA, which is Georgian Danette, which is actually a nice little touch as well.
It's really lovely.
So that's some of the gems, a tiny, tiny, tiny little bit of the gems that we've got in our collection. But what we're going to talk about today is something that we discovered in the Hans Feibusch studio collection, which we received. It was bequeathed to us by Hans Feibusch, and we received it after his death in 1998. And there was over 150 books included in his studio archive. And when we were cataloguing these, we discovered these two gems.
We did. Hans Feibusch was a German artist originally from Jewish heritage. He had Jewish parents, and he fled the Nazis in 1933 and came over to Britain and worked here for many, many years, mainly on mural art, which we will move on to in a little bit. But we have two beautiful books here, which, again, going back to what Jane said about a book being turned into an archival piece, being turned into an artwork, these two books are just absolutely gorgeous. This is the Penguin Book of French Verse, and as you open the cover, it's very fragile, so I feel a little nervous opening it. But as you open the cover, you can see here on the front, so you've got the title page here, and then this is the sort of frontispiece, I suppose, just before, which Feibusch has actually painted himself in watercolour, and you can see the sort of the pencil marks and the underlying ink as well in this piece. And this discovery was quite nice, wasn't it? Because we now know that this is the Palace of Versailles. So if you're standing up at the top of the palace and looking down the vista, this is the view that you'd have down from Versailles in Paris. And it really is just gorgeous, isn't it? I mean, to be able to personalise a book like this in his own sort of very special way, something that was such an ordinary book, something that probably wouldn't have been very expensive to buy, I just think is wonderful.
And it is, you can see it's Feibusch, the colours are starting to be very vibrant, and that beautiful sort of loose working there. And
also that sort of, that stylised statue a little bit as well, the sort of the highlights which you see in his later mural painting as well, is something that's really, really gorgeous.
I think this was published in 1959, so obviously it was painted after 1959, but we have no idea apart from that. No.
But I think Paris would have held a really special place for Feibusch as well. He actually studied there for a period prior to 1925, and he studied with André Holt, for a period before he came over here as well. So this is something that, I mean, he would have been very familiar, I assume, with Versailles. Such a gorgeous book. And we have a second one as well. Whilst we're on the Penguin books, we move from French verse to English verse. And Jen, you might know a little bit more about the actual cover for this one, but should we start with the cover?
Yes, this is Hans. When we got the studio archive from Hans Feibusch, it contained probably thousands and thousands of pieces of paper of all sorts, including lots of postcards, lots and lots and lots of postcards. And this particular postcard, he's hand coloured. And they were just inspirational. They were just things that he used, he referred to, he copied, probably. So he stuck that on the front, which is quite interesting. He's covered the cover, which...
That's something that was just inspiring for him.
What is also nice is there's some paint here. His studio was absolutely filthy. He's an artist, so he was obviously covered in paint. Everything was covered in paint. But he also smoked like a chimney and had a wood-burning stove, which made everything covered in soot. So it was a very grubby studio. But, you know, a working studio.
He lived to almost 100, which is kind of incredible when you're breathing all of that.
I think he was 3 weeks short of his 100th birthday, and he was working up till the very end. He died in 1998.
That's amazing, isn't it?
But do you want to reveal?
Yes, I will reveal, just before the big reveal. Also just to say that I think I read that there are 1,700 works that came from the studio, objects from the Hans Feibusch studio that came to Pallant House, including 80 paintings, 50 sculptures, and I don't know how many pieces of paper, like you said.
Oh,
thousands,
we've not counted the pieces of paper.
So the big reveal. This is in the Penguin English verse, and you have this absolutely beautiful. Pop it up a little bit without tearing the cover off. You have this absolutely beautiful, another hand illustrated, hand painted, small artwork by Hans Feibusch. And you can see here this portrait of himself, self-portrait, as a sunflower, which is really beautiful. And sunflowers are something that Feibusch uses quite a lot in his art. And he paints a few still lifes in the 1940s. I think there's one for 1947, which sort of shows this kind of drooping sunflower. It's quite sad, leaves falling off, petals falling off. Whereas this piece, you've got this really lovely, bright, vibrant, caring sunflower with these leaves, almost like arms wrapped around this female figure. And we think that this female figure is Phyllis Bray.
Yeah.
And Phyllis Bray worked with Feibusch for over 40 years on the mural paintings that they did together across 30 Anglican churches across Britain. And it's just this really caring, lovely image, isn't it?
And what's interesting, we'll look at some of the photographs to sort of that has helped us make that deduction about the fact that it's Feibusch self-portrait and Phyllis Bray. But the sunflower, that symbol in mythology and spirituality of fidelity, of
devotion,
of love and sort of kindness almost.
Yeah, almost a personal faith, isn't it, in each other, that sort of leaning on each other, which is just a beautiful, beautiful picture. And again,
there's quite a nice little. This was a later work by him,
lovely.
Which is called Madonna of the Sunflowers. This was actually in 1984, so this is actually quite late because again, this was published in 1956, the Penguin Book of Verse. So it was after that date. But Phyllis Bray died in 1991. This isn't her, but it's quite nice that there's a later work that still uses the sunflower as a reference.
And having sunflowers surrounding her as well. I mean, even sort of the colours of her clothes and her positioning, her head slightly tilted down, you can definitely see a resemblance between the two. Thanks for digging that out. That's,
So yes, how we made the deduction that it was, assuming it's a self-portrait, was because of this amazing archive that we received, which included hundreds of photographs. So these are photographs of Feibusch and Phyllis Bray working on it's St Barnabas's church in Eltham, and this was 1957. So this was quite late. Not quite late, but this was later in the sort of their working lives together.
Let's have a little look at that.
I think
these
that
are
one.
The two that I mean, you definitely can see a resemblance, even the way her hair has been styled. I mean, it's difficult, isn't it?
It is.
I don't want to say 100%.
No, I mean, I think that one as well. That one, I think you've got that her profile, which again you pick up there with that lovely aquiline nose.
Yeah, it's lovely seeing them working together as well. This sort of development. I mean, these are a little bit. This is a later one, isn't it? And then
I don't think that is St Barnabas, but.
Controversial.
I don't know. But these two are. She's obviously much younger in that one. It's difficult to tell. I mean, the photographs might just be not very well taken. Yeah. And then we've got sort of leaning across. We've got a nice early picture of Feibusch with his glasses, which.
Oh, it's perfect, isn't it?
You know, it's pretty much.
The sunflower self-portrait. Yes. And talking of glasses as well.
Glasses.
So excited to move on to the glasses. What's in the package today?
I'll unwrap these carefully because the lenses always fall out. But here we are, Feibusch's glasses. So in the studio archive, it was all sorts of miscellaneous things, including his glasses. He lost, as he got older, he started to lose his sight, so he actually got his walking cane, his white stick. But the glasses, the lenses are so thick.
Huge, aren't they?
You know, they're incredibly magnifying. So these were in the studio when it was given to us.
It's quite nice, isn't it? Personal touch.
Yeah, absolutely.
Really nice.
And, you know, he obviously wore glasses throughout his life.
Yeah.
I think they're very similar to the ones that are in this one.
Oh yeah, they do look like that, don't they? Yeah.
But yes, part of the archive does include, going back to Phyllis Bray and Feibusch, I think it's quite interesting to think about that sort of speculation about how they might have known each other. We know that Feibusch joined the London group when he moved to England. So he joined the London group at about 1934, 35. There seems to be two different dates for that. And you found out that Phyllis Braid joined the year before?
The year before, yeah, in 33. So, and we were sort of discussing before, weren't we, that they might have met there, been introduced. But it was the architect Maxwell Fry who really brought Feibusch into the group.
Yeah.
And we have here, which is very, very lovely as well, a private view ticket to the London group, which both artists were part of. And this is for... Interesting. Oh, 1953.
Oh, you've got it there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry. I've looked at this before. And on the back of it, which is really lovely, are a couple of drawn angels sketches on them as well. And as we look a little bit more at Feibusch's mural paintings, we'll see a lot of sort of angels, religious figures in his works as well. So this would have been, I suppose, a sort of quick preliminary sketch.
Yeah, I mean, angels seem to be a very important theme through Feibusch. Apparently, he left Germany in 1933 because of pressures of Nazism, and he was a very active painter then. He was actually doing murals before he left Germany, but in 1937, his work was actually included in the General Art Exhibition held in Munich, put on by the Nazis to show, mostly Jewish artists. And Feibusch's art isn't necessarily controversial as such.
And probably the most conservative sort of work that was included in that show, along with abstract paintings.
Yeah, but because he was Jewish. And again, we're not sure. Some references talk about two works being on display in the degenerate art, but we know certainly one, and they were destroyed, or it was destroyed, and apparently it was of angels. So that's quite an interesting.
It's really interesting.
Yeah,
really interesting. And faith's obviously something that became very important to him a little bit later on as well, when he converted to Christianity. So should we have a little look at...
So just going back to Maxwell Fry, because Maxwell Fry was actually a very important influence in Feibusch's life, and Feibusch produced a book called Mural Painting in 1946, and the key acknowledgement is to Edward Maxwell Fry. Fry actually was a member of the London group. He was a modernist architect, and he got Feibusch's first commission for a mural painting at the Methodist Church in Collier's Wood in 1930. 6-ish, 5-ish, and it was through him. But it was also through other members of the London group who were architects who were working very closely in restoring the London churches after the Second World War. And through the Collier's Wood Commission, that's how he got to meet George Bell. So Bishop George Bell, Bishop of Chichester, was a very active patron of modern art, and he commissioned Feibusch for lots and lots of mural paintings in Christian churches. This is a Jewish artist, in Christian churches across Sussex, and through that he got commissions beyond London. This is the Heat of Vision. This was an exhibition that Pallant House put on, which was the first kind of like comprehensive look at Feibusch's work in a gallery. He'd been showing at one-man shows from 1934 in London, at La Fave, and we've got a photograph of his first show in 1934. And it was really, George Bell subsequently became Feibusch's most important patron, but Feibusch did work on other commissions as well. Maxwell Fry commissioned him in 1935 to paint wall paintings for his brand new modernist house in Frognall in Hampstead called the Sun House. Unfortunately, those paintings no longer exist. The house is still there, but the paintings have gone. And it's an incredibly modernist, white concrete house with these amazing Feibusch paintings in them. And just looking through this book, you can see his style. He was also commissioned, these are some of the Christian motifs.
You can really see his style as well, again, across all three genres that he sort of works in as well. I mean, mythology, landscapes, religious art. And it is something, his work is very recognisable, I think. That's our Narcissus, isn't it?
Yes. They're stunning colours. I think that's what's beautiful about them. He also painted some of the murals at Portmeirion for Clough William Ellis, and he was commissioned by Dudley Town Hall to paint a mural there, and Newport Civic Centre, he painted murals there. In 1948, he painted the mural for the tea rooms at the V&A for Britain Can Make It exhibition, which was a post-war, get Britain back on its feet sort of before the Festival of Britain happened. And I think, these photographs of him working in situ are fascinating.
And also with this scaffold as well, where he's trying to reach the higher parts of his rather dangerous looking ladder,
absolutely.
Precariously placed, no health and safety. Looking very proud with his half-finished. I was going to try and leave that up, but it's not going to work, is it?
Yes, the church murals are really interesting because Feibusch was Jewish. He actually converted to Christianity in 1965, but towards the end of his life, he reconverted back to Judaism. But he worked with Bell in all sorts of churches. There's works in Chichester Cathedral. There's works
in the baptistry piece, isn't it? In Chichester Cathedral, and
also in the Bishop's Palace as well. There's work there. Goring by Sea, which is not far away. That's got an amazing mural. Brighton, Eastbourne, St Elizabeth's Eastbourne. They've actually physically taken the Feibusch out. It's enormous great concrete slabs that have been chiselled out and put into store to protect them. And I think that's the thing, that people are starting to sort of... He's one of these people who, if you know Feibusch, people are very, very enthusiastic, but a lot of people have never heard of him, and I think that's quite an interesting...
Also, with something like a mural painting, they're not always that stable.
No.
Depending on the materials that he used for specific commissions, they might not last as long as, for instance, an oil painting that we have here at the gallery. They really are lovely, these photographs, aren't they? With his flat cap on.
Yes.
And his oval.
I haven't got his flat cap.
This is an earlier picture, isn't it?
Yes, I think.
Is this the fishmonger?
It's the fishmonger, yeah.
That I read about. There's slightly more hair in this one. This was a much earlier piece, wasn't it, this one? There's not a date on the back of it, with the photograph. So we have that one as well. And then, should we say a little bit about...
Yes, I mean, when Feibusch came to Britain, he... in 1933, he had been established in Germany. He was a known artist and he had worked on murals. He travelled and studied across Europe. I mean, he won...
it was Munich, wasn't it?
Yeah,
Berlin University, was it? And then in Paris as
well. And the Prix de Rome, so he was in Italy, and that, probably in Italy is where he got interested in the frescoes and the Renaissance murals.
You'd think, yeah.
I mean, certainly would be inspired. And he does mention that in his mural painting, which was a really well-received book. It was published in 1946. This one was actually dedicated to somebody called Jean by Feibusch on publication. And he goes through the history of mural painting. This was published, obviously, it was written during the war and published just after the war, so not very much colour, but surprisingly good quality reproductions in black and white. And then he brings it up to date with examples of his own work, but also contemporary mural artists as well.
That's really fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, faith must have been hugely important to him as well. Not just because, he escaped the Nazis, but also he fought in the First World War, didn't he?
Yeah.
With the German army on the Russian front in 1914 to 1916. And he must have seen some horrific things as part of that. I think he describes faith as something that is incredibly important to him, but it doesn't necessarily need to sit within a religious community such as Judaism or Christianity, or it's an all-encompassing faith. I think he said that much later on in his life, just before he died.
I think that's why it's it's probably why his Christian work is so accessible, because it doesn't feel...
It's for everybody.
You know, it doesn't feel like it's dictating to you.
Yeah.
You just kind of like sort of have pleasure in these forms and shapes and these amazing colours.
Definitely. Colourful, but also quite calming, I always think, his work.
Yeah.
And so we have this small book.
Yeah, so when, as I said, when Feibusch arrived in London, he had been established as an artist, but he obviously needed to make his own living. He was about to get married. His wife-to-be was Sidonie Gestetner, who had a daughter from a previous marriage. So Feibusch inherited a stepdaughter. And they moved to London, and he started to do things like book illustration, poster work. He did posters for Shell, and book jackets and things like that. And then, as I mentioned, he got the one-man show at Lefebvre, and gradually, through Maxwell Fry, through the London group, through connections, he got those commissions. Obviously, meeting George Bell became incredibly important, as you know, such a prolific commissions from Bell, and he became known across the country, really, because his work is everywhere.
It is everywhere. And he produced so much as well, didn't he?
Yeah, I mean, there's a pub in I think it's Falmouth. No, Foy. There's a pub in Foy in Cornwall that's got murals by him. There's Portmeirion in Wales. There's Dudley. There's Newport. There's lots of churches in London. Lots of churches around Sussex. So, you know, he was a very prolific and interesting muralist. But this is a lovely, charming little book. Yeah, it's a children's book with these lovely illustrations.
And then finally, shall we have a look at this?
Yes, which we haven't found any evidence of him using it, but...
We just found this whilst we were trying to set up works from the archive for this footage. And there's this wonderful receipt for a suit of armour that was in Feibusch's possession at some point. We're not sure when he bought it, or... actually, this would have a date on it, wouldn't it?
61.
61, but we don't know what happened to the suit of armour, which is quite funny. But on the back as well, again, this is something that Feibusch does all the time. He's always sketching on the back of whatever he can find. If it's not the London group, if it's not the London group private view, it's this, and you can see it's lovely.
Or books.
On absolutely everything. And this is a much more. Well, in a way, it's rougher in terms of sketch, isn't it? But there's a lot more figures here, and he's obviously trying to work out an overall composition for a large mural from this sketch. But yeah, this lovely suit of armour.
But literally, he sketches on absolutely anything. You know, we've got menus, private view cards, postcards, receipts.
He paid a
£5
fair amount for it. Yeah,
£5 guineas,
yeah.
which is quite a lot, 1961. And I'm assuming he just rented it. It's interesting, actually. There's a picture back here that's got a tabard in it, but can't speculate. I think it's earlier there.
Oh yeah.
I can't see what date that is. Oh, 1969.
Yeah, whether it was that or whether it was a full plated suit.
But he you know, things like these beautiful depictions of what are they, the monkeys, the apes. I mean, he went to London Zoo and was drawing, but in the books that we got from his studio, there's a beautiful natural history book where one of the apes is posed exactly like this. You know, so his books were obviously incredibly important resource and inspiration for him. Unfortunately, his marks on those are usually just grubby rather than interesting archive. No annotations, but
honestly, what a lot of treasures.
And this is just
here.
Such a tiny little amount.
But it's lovely to have all of these pieces and so many different works, the photographs, the books, you know, the archival material, the receipts, everything. Jane, thank you so much for bringing us in here and for showing us all of these wonderful pieces.
It's a pleasure.
And Jane and I are working on a print room exhibition at the moment, and it will be going on until July the 17th. And it's called Undercover, the Art of the Book Jacket.
And if you want to find out more about the library and archives here at Patronage House Gallery, then please go to our website. The library is open, but by appointment only, so you're very welcome to make an appointment.